I understand you'd like from me a few words about the global environment vis-a-vis China and U.S.-China relations, and what that means for Chile and for Latin America more generally. I think the situation is rather straightforward, and that is that China has had a tremendous economic success over the last 45 years, really since Deng Xiaoping came to power in 1978. This has propelled China to be the world's largest trading power and one of the most dynamic and innovative economies in the world today. And this has led to geopolitical tension with the United States primarily, but a tension that economists should not respect, because economists believe in win-win, and I believe China's gains are good for the United States and good for the world. But if you are a geostrategist in the United States, you believe China's gains are bad for the U.S. because of diminishing relative U.S. power. There's no doubt the U.S. power in the world is diminished. There's no doubt that China is another option for countries. There's no doubt that most of the developing world does not want a U.S.-led hegemony anyway, but it was living with one, or at least with the U.S. intention of one. And the rise of China changes this fundamentally, because now the balance of power is much more dispersed. The BRICS countries have an output when measured in purchasing power prices that is even slightly larger than the G7 right now. Of course, the BRICS have many more people than the G7, so the per capita income in the G7 is much higher. But just the BRICS is a larger block, around 32% of world output compared to 31% of world output of the G7. U.S.-China tensions have been rising since 2014, and my view is that the U.S. security state already around 2015 began to push for measures to, in the American mindset, contain China. I think there was a change of mindset around that time in the American political and security leadership that said China's continued rise is no longer in America's interest. And a series of measures have been implemented since 2015 that really aim to hinder China's economy and, according to the US, hinder China's military capacity, but I think it's more general than that. And those measures include, of course, trying to establish a Trans-Pacific partnership that would exclude China. Rather extraordinary in my mind, almost laughable to make a Pacific Basin trading system designed to exclude China, as if somehow the Chinese economy wasn't there and the 1.4 billion people of China were not there. Of course, the US is constructing new alliances like AUKUS, the Australia, UK, US grouping to base nuclear submarines in Australia, ostensibly to police the South China Sea. The US has imposed technology barriers on China, financial barriers on China. The US has targeted leading Chinese enterprises like Huawei and ZTE. The US is going after TikTok, and now it's going after the cloud services of Alibaba and other major tech companies in China. So Why is it doing this? In my view, it is mainly a misguided and a dangerous approach to try to maintain U.S. predominance over China. I think that it is both wrongly directed and almost sure to fail because China is a very successful society and successful economy with a lot of dynamism, with a lot of scientific and research capacity, with a lot of friends around the world. And the U.S. idea of dominance is not very attractive to most of the world. Most of the world would like good relations with the U.S., but not a U.S. that is dominant. I don't know of countries that are willing to make sacrifices for U.S. dominance other than the close U.S. allies. So when it comes to certainly Chile or Mercosur, Latin America more generally, or UNISUR, the goal for sure is to keep good, open trade relations and financial relations and technology relations with China, and to aim to do the same with the United States and with Europe. I don't think that there is any remotely sensible policy other than the South American countries saying, of course we trade with China normally, of course we're partners with China, but we're also partners with the US and Europe, and we see absolutely no reason to choose sides, and we don't want to be pushed to choose sides. I personally see nothing nefarious in any of China's initiatives, whether it's the Belt and Road Initiative or others, and I don't believe the Western press, which I regard as mostly propaganda, that the Belt and Road Initiative is a debt trap or Chinese companies are especially harmful to host countries and so forth. So I don't view this as a complicated question, actually, in its substance. I see the U.S. changed its attitude. And when I say the U.S., I mean the security establishment, which runs the U.S. government foreign policy, changed its attitude to China 8 years ago. I do not believe that China provoked that. I don't think it was in response to hostile action from China. I think it was in response to China's success rather than to hostility from China. So I would encourage Chile and Latin America to keep open trade. Every day I say in the United States, maintain relations with China, stop trying to provoke a conflict over Taiwan, stop sending arms to Taiwan. Don't do in Taiwan what we did in Ukraine, which was to create the provocations that led to war, because I also believe that the Ukraine war was caused by US provocations, not by Russian imperial design. Of course, most American leaders violently disagree with me, or maybe not violently, but strongly disagree with me, but I'm old enough that I understand them at this point after almost 50 years of watching US foreign policy, and I think they're wrong, and I think they're provocative. And I don't want them to do the same thing in Taiwan that they've done in Ukraine, which is pump in a lot of arms and then express surprise when a war starts. But that's a possibility that would be a terrible possibility. I believe the US sanction regimes in general are illegal. I do not abide by unilateral coercive measures. My understanding of international law, as reflected in annual votes by the UN General Assembly, is that such sanctions policies are not valid unless adopted by the UN. So I would hope that Latin America would not get trapped in sanctions regimes, but basically would also take the position that nobody can sanction Chile's trade with China. And by the way, Chile's trade with Russia or others, though it's not as important. because if there are to be such sanctions, they're only valid if they're undertaken under the UN Charter, essentially by the UN Security Council. So that's my general view. And my general belief is that trade between South America and China should be strong, and I think it will be mutually beneficial. Latin America, of course, has a resource base which is very complementary to China's. China likes wonderful wine, great fruits, minerals, many wonderful things that Chile specializes in producing. It needs those things, and I think that it will trade and help enrich Chile doing so. At the same time, China has some excellent low-cost infrastructure technologies that I think can be a very great benefit for South America in terms of rolling out 5G, in terms of an integrated zero-carbon power system. China's very good at long-distance direct current high voltage transmission to build an integrated South America-wide zero carbon power system, which Chile could be a very important energy provider to such a system. And so I see many complementarities that are very strong, and hope that Latin America's and South America's trade, finance, diplomatic relations with China remain strong and dynamic. Maybe I'll just stop at that point.